clearly this paper has, has been a significant, has raised a significant set of issues. And it's still going to take some time, and it's 3:54. So I've had a look at the agenda, and we've consulted with staff about what can be simply put on the table to next week. Now, can I just explain this? That next week is the 5th Thursday in this month. So normally speaking, we wouldn't have a council meeting next week. So the time was made available for the Metro funding, metropolitan funding decisions. Yes, and so the first item on the agenda on that day will be the Metro funding decisions. It is a decision of council, but traditionally the Deputy Mayor has chaired that process, and so I will continue that. But my suggestion is that we defer the balance of the papers to that meeting. The first up will be the South Shore, South New Brighton Earthquake Legacy Project, immediately after the Metro decisions are made. Followed, and the other items that will be deferred to that date are the Capital Endowment Fund applications, item number 23, 24, Community Resilience Partnership Fund, the 25, 2019-20 Strategy and Policy Forward Work Programme, noting that it was delivered on the date that it was promised, and the Victoria Street Revitalisation. So those items. So we'll deal now with the Hagley Oval proposed amendments to the district plan, and then we'll move on to the funding and financing options for improving warmth and dryness of social housing. So we'll deal with those two papers for today, and then we'll move on to the PX agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Totally agree that in item 23, if that could be at the front of next week's meeting, because there is a community group that is waiting for confirmation of that funding which is involved in that. I'm sure all of them are, but that is actually quite important. Yeah,
I mean, relatively early on the agenda, if it's relatively quick.
I can't control that, as you know.
No, but I can't either, which I think people are finally noticing. So, okay, thank you very much. So I think that if we'd thought of next week as an additional day, we would have restructured the agenda to have these items on the agenda next week anyway. And it actually does give us time to reflect on the deputations that we heard on South Shore and South New Brighton. I know that a number of us want to see some positive work done, and that gives us the time to do that. All right, so I'll open up this item to questions of our council staff. I don't know, David, did you want to give a brief intro?
Before we start, I just wanted to ask Brent to make a clarification on a point that was raised earlier. So, Brent, were you going to?
Sure. There were some legal questions raised just at the end of the last deputation to do with the relationship between a regeneration plan and the Hagley Park management plan. And I just thought it might be useful as a starting point to emphasise the point that the Mayor has been making throughout the time I've been in this meeting, and that's what exactly the Council is being asked to decide on here. The Council is being asked to decide on a piece of feedback to Regenerate Christchurch on a decision that Regenerate Christchurch then makes about whether to recommend to the Minister a process for changing the district plan. So that's what you're here to decide. What you're not here to decide is the content of a regeneration plan or the content of a Hagley Park management plan or the relationship between the two. That's a wholly separate matter. So there were some questions about section 63.5 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act, and that section's about the relationship between the regeneration plan and the Hagley Park management plan. Well, that's not relevant for your decision today. That might be relevant down the track for other decision making that the Council might need to go through in relation to Reserves Act processes or the content of the Hagley Park management plan. There's another section in the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act, Section 71, says that the Minister can't direct a change to the Hagley Park Management Plan. Well, that's something to note. The Minister can't direct a change to the Hagley Park Management Plan, but there's no proposal that the Minister direct a change to the Hagley Park Management Plan. So that's also irrelevant. You know, the only question you're being asked to decide on is the content of your feedback to Regenerate Christchurch about a decision that the board of Regenerate Christchurch then make. Thank you.
This is the difference between a practising lawyer and someone who hasn't practised law for a very long time. You put that very succinctly. Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. And when it comes to the reasons for using the Regen Act in this particular circumstance, how similar or dissimilar are those reasons between the two that council has proposed in Littleton and Cranford? Because it would seem to me that the reasons that that Regen are proposing this one are similar to the reasons that as a council we propose the changes to Littleton, and they would seem to be more beneficial, if you like, or more useful than with Cranford.
Yeah, it's not really my place to assess which one might be more useful.
But yeah.
But I agree totally that they both have the objective of regeneration, and they both meet the regeneration objective of the Act.
Thank you.
Mike and Phil.
Thanks. Just a quick question. Obviously, the purpose of the Regeneration Act is to support the regeneration of Christchurch. So, on that basis, when was the last time an international day-night cricket game was played in Christchurch?
Dave? I presume it would be around 2010, 2011 when the previous AMI stadium was fully functional.
And the reason we don't have one now?
Yeah.
Hey, Phil.
Thank you for your report. Can I just ask you, especially given the public interest in this, can you perhaps just clarify for me the sort of steps that are now going to be required with this draft proposal in terms of especially in relation to how that might trigger the Reserves Act hearing, and what kind of time frame that will be best done in?
So we're required to provide feedback as one of the strategic partners by 4 September. So that's what we're on track to do, and that's why we're having this conversation here today. So we're providing a range of feedback to Regenerate Christchurch, in particular some technical feedback on the district plan changes that they're proposing be made, and we've worked with them on that. So we'll provide that feedback on this draft proposal. They'll then consider that, and as you heard earlier from Ivan, that will go through a process of them developing a proposal which will go to their board for a decision, and if they decide to carry that forward, that will then go to the Minister. The Minister will then make a decision. I believe she's got 30 days to make that decision.
Thank you, David.
So I was informed earlier. So the Minister has that time to decide to go ahead or not, and then the Minister will put that out for comment for a period of time that of her choosing. From my understanding, having spoken to my colleagues at DPMC, their initial thinking around this is that this is a matter that obviously will be of considerable public interest, so they wouldn't be looking at a quick period of time, so they may, it would be potentially a month or so for that process.
So with that in mind, David, if in fact there was to be a significant impact still on Hagley and change with the management plan, would that still allow council some time to do a consultation process with residents?
So I'll hand over to Andrew in a sec, but as you heard earlier from Ivan, we are having conversations now about, so if we were to go down this process as I've just described it, how could we think about that Reserves Act process that most likely would be required to be undertaken if there was going to be a change to the lease, which would kick that process off. So we're in literally today been talking about how we can, what the opportunities are to run those processes concurrently. So we are actually doing that, but I'll hand over to Andrew in terms of detail.
Sure, and I guess just a point of clarification, as I believe we've just heard, this process is not to change the Hagley Park management plan, it's to effect change in the district plan. When Regenerate, if that decision is made to proceed, Regenerate and the Trust are going to have to come up with a detailed plan in respect to the floodlight issue. There are other matters, but in respect to the floodlight issue, and present that to council. When we receive that, we will be able to ascertain whether or not a new lease or amended lease is required. At that point, typically council will then be notified and then make a decision on whether they wish to notify a lease or a new lease. And that applies to any recreation reserve, not just Hagley Park. So a very separate process to the regeneration process. So once we receive the design and we can analyse it, advice can be given whether or not that triggers the Reserves Act requirement.
Thanks, Andrew. So would that process in effect be separate, in effect, would follow on from the Section 71, and would it be its own process with decision making by the council after?
They are two separate processes.
Very separate processes.
Yes.
So, sorry, just one clarification about that though. It doesn't have to follow on. It can be concurrent. So
that's what we're looking at. Yeah.
So that's what the staff are investigating. Parallel processes, if you know what I mean. So if the Canterbury Cricket Trust get the detailed design of what's proposed to the council, as Andrew says, the council then assesses whether a change to the lease is needed, and if it is needed, that process can happen at the same time as the Minister going through the Section 71 process.
Just for point of clarity, and I know Robert's here somewhere, but he's advised me that effectively that assessment, if a tower was to be erected somewhere other than where the existing lease allows for, that enough will trigger. It must be a new lease.
Yeah. Last question is there a way still, a possibility that through the discussions around the technical parts, that in fact we might still be able to reduce the number of towers? Is that a possibility technically, or do we still need to get that advice?
I can't answer the technical aspect, other than obviously there's a lot of work to do in that space. Through this process, they've taken a high-level view that 6 towers may be required, but yes, it could be possible that it could be done with less and lower, as we've already provided advice on. Yep.
So is it worth us noting in this resolution that staff will work with Regenerate Christchurch on receipt of the detailed design, so that a process can be established should the Minister make the decision to take it to the next stage?
I think
because it does seem to me that it would be premature to start a process prior to the Minister making the decision to go the next step.
Yes.
Whereas if the Minister goes the next step, I don't think we need to wait for her to make a decision before we start the process.
No, and the normal process, whether it's at a community board level or the council level, is that staff would prepare a report for the governing group to make a decision whether they wish to proceed or not, with notifying. So that's something else to consider in terms of timeframes. Whether or not this discussion is enough.
No.
Or whether or not we need to...
I don't think so. I think
I anticipated that would be the case.
The clear message that we've got is that it ought to be a public process.
No, well, not enough in terms of public process. Whether or not you need a report brought back to you to pass a resolution to notify it.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't me predetermining my position.
So That's not a regulatory requirement, that's
Yeah.
our practice, our business practice.
Okay, now I had someone with a hand up over here, Yanni, and then Raf.
Just to kind of understand, there's been a lot of focus on the lighting towers, but all the other stuff like the car parking, the number of event days, etc. Can you just explain why they're not dealt with through the management plan and the lease, and are being dealt with through the district plan?
Well, they're not lease issues, is the simplest explanation. The Cricket Trust does not hold a lease for car parking, or any of those other matters. So there's no Reserves Act process that would be triggered by modification to those resource consent conditions.
So the lease doesn't govern the usage in any way?
The lease covers the footprint of the building and the lighting towers.
Right, okay, thanks for clarifying that. Just in terms of one of the things in Regenerate's report is that this is to attract women's internationals, but there seems to be very few women's internationals that have played, and they don't seem to have had very many in the past.
Sorry, I think you've misunderstood the paper. It says to attract a particular women's international. It is not designed to attract them generically. It's designed around, otherwise they'd be going through a resource management process. They've asked for this to be considered in this context simply because of the urgency of the current situation.
Right, so just on page 567, the current limit of 13 match days for fixtures of 2,000 spectators or more is too restrictive to accommodate potential demand for the ground and does not provide for the expected increase in popularity of the women's game. I'm just trying to understand, given the increase in popularity and given that there's no forecast matches, is there some requirements that we should be considering around if this goes through? There's a requirement to have X amount of women's games per year or as part of the bidding process, so that the purpose of which we're doing this actually does get that benefit for the women's game.
Well, we're not really in a position to dictate to New Zealand Cricket what games they allocate. And the international schedule is internationally worked out in advance for many years. So I think the point that the applicant is trying to make is to be able to be in a position to facilitate and bid for as many of the top tier games as possible. So
how do we ensure that? Because I actually have some sympathy for the fact that women's cricket is growing in popularity and is something that, in terms of equity, gender equity in our city and in sports, is something that should be supported. How do we ensure that if we go through this and we've invested in the Oval and upgraded it, that we actually get women's games there?
From a legal point of view, we can't, and it's quite appropriate that we can't. The district plan is enabling. It's not obligatory. So what we're talking about here is a change to the district plan that enables things to happen. It's not the role of the district plan or of a resource consent to require activity to occur. So you use these planning tools under the RMA to provide the opportunity.
Right, so we deal with it through the lease.
Yeah.
Okay.
Raf, and then Vicky.
Yeah, thanks. Really a process question here. So looking at the attachment A on page 548, so this is written from the council's perspective, and really, I completely disagree with it, and I have no idea how staff have come to this position. But this is a submission written on our behalf. How do we actually determine whether we support it, or how do we amend it? Do we just say we do support it or we don't support it, or we try and amend it, which would be no doubt?
I might be able to help you out with that one shortly, Raf.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Because actually, I would say this is, someone who was involved in the drafting of the Regeneration Act, this is the complete opposite of what it was supposed to achieve. Complete opposite. It's a fantastic demonstration of why we actually tried to get this thing done. It was for fast track planning to avoid this kind of nonsense.
Yeah. I want to come back to process because and I'll come to Vicky next, but I'm just wondering whether, in light of your comments before, we need a statement that would enable staff to proceed with or initiate consultation regarding the change to the Hagley Park management plan. No, is it to the plan or is it to the lease?
The lease.
To the lease, sorry, to the lease. Should the minister decide to proceed with the Section 71 process. So, I mean, it's just to give you, I mean, do you need some sort of wording to get you authorised to start the next process should the minister, because, I mean, I'm just mindful of the fact that our last meeting's on the 26th of September and we ain't going to have a time frame to work on, so it might be quite good to give you the authority to proceed.
Sorry.
Yes, yes, it will enable us to be timely in the notification process.
Right.
Noting that once notified, submissions are received and a hearing is established,
Yeah.
and council can then enact its duties.
Yeah.
So, as I said, the normal process would be to receive the application, present the application to council, but I think we know what the application is.
Yeah.
And then we would notify.
Right.
Yes. So a resolution today, as you mentioned, which is should the minister wish to proceed, would be more timely, noting that the applicant and the proponent are mindful of the bidding process
Yeah.
for the Women's World Cup.
Okay, so we'll word something along those lines so that enables a process to continue should the minister determine to proceed. Vicky?
Can I just get a clear sort of options of the two processes? So the easy one, if they go through the resource management process, how long does that take?
If the process is the same as the one that was taken for establishing Hagley Oval in the first place, or for the pavilion and the embankments and so on, that was a direct referral to the Environment Court.
Yes.
So that process, from memory, the application was lodged in December and the court's final decision was, I think, August of the following year.
Right.
So that was through a direct referral sort of process. That's as fast as it gets.
And you can't speed that up?
No.
Right. Okay, but anybody can then submit who's capable of writing a thing to the Environment Court?
Yeah, so the process for the direct referral is that the application is lodged with the council notifies it, people put in a submission, and then the applicant for consent decides whether to ask the council to directly refer it to the Environment Court.
So that's about 7 months or so?
In that case it was, yeah. I can't imagine it being much faster than that.
Okay, and then in this process, so just say the minister decides to go ahead, let's just make some assumptions, and then she has to hear public opinion in that process?
Receive public comment.
Receive public comment. So she doesn't have to meet any member of the public?
No, it says written.
Written comment, there's no requirement for any hearings.
So they just write and she reads and either takes notice or not, and there's no capacity for anybody to view that process at all. It's completely invisible to the public.
That is the process as per the Act. The Act doesn't prevent the minister from deciding to run a slightly different process if she has a mind to, but the requirements of the Act is public comment, written public comment. Words to that effect.
Your advice to Regen Christchurch suggests that we recommend to Regen Christchurch that they run a public process before they refer to the minister, if that's what the board decide to do. And I think, you know, I mean, have you thought about that? I mean, obviously you've thought about it because you're recommending it to Regen Christchurch, but can you talk about the advantages and why we would recommend that to Regen Christchurch?
Yep. So just a bit of context, and there was a question before about Littleton, and we've done this through lifts as well. So that is a similar process to what we did for those Section 71s. We've done a public consultation process as part of those processes. So yeah, you can do those processes and still fulfil the requirements under Section 71.
Right.
Of the
Can I
Act.
just finish the...
Okay.
Right,
Yep. No, carry
so the
on.
Minister under the Act runs a session or doesn't run a session. People just have to put their views, and that's completely invisible to the public in terms of how she's arrived at that.
Yep.
So she makes her decision, and then there's a requirement for...
Sorry, just pausing there. It's not completely invisible to the public. Well, the Minister makes a decision behind closed doors, but if the Minister declines to exercise the power in Section 71, the Minister must provide reasons for her decision.
Yeah.
Yep.
But there's no sort of public thing that you can come and sit in and listen to both sides of the argument or anything.
There's none provided for expressly in the Act, but this was something that we've been looking at a little bit today as a result of the question from Councillor Johansson, I think it was, which was whether there's any prospect under the Act for the Minister to choose to establish some sort of hearings process. And it's our assessment that there's no bar to the Minister choosing to do that, but there's no requirement that the Minister do it. Now, if the Minister was to decide to have some sort of hearings process, it would have to be in a very tight window, because the Minister's obliged by the Act to issue a decision no later than 30 working days after the close of the period for putting in written comments.
Okay.
Is that why you recommended that we recommend to the Region Christchurch that they conduct that process? Because once it's in the Minister's hands, she can only say yes or no.
Yeah.
She can't amend the proposal, whereas Region Christchurch could amend the proposal as a result of public engagement and get a different or a more explicit response to community concerns addressed prior to it going to the board.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right, and then having, so she's done that, then it comes to us because it requires a change to the management plan and the lease.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't require any change to the management plan or the lease.
To the lease.
No, it doesn't require any change to either of those. It requires a change to the district plan. Now, if the detailed design is different from the lease, there has to be a variation of the lease. That has been worked out long before the stage of the Minister having made her decision, because the parties want that to happen as parallel process.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is what public input is there into that?
Into which?
Either of those two processes.
Well, in the lease process, it's very prescribed in the Act. We must notify for a minimum of 1 calendar month, which is what we typically do. We'll receive all the submissions. Literally, the Act states submissions and objections. We must allow anyone who wishes to be heard.
By whom? Who's the hearings
By
panel?
council. Council are the administrator of the
Council
lease.
hearings panel.
Yeah,
Of
completely
councillors?
separate to the regeneration process.
Of councillors, of elected people?
Typically, it is councillors, but we
Right.
have had independent commissioners in some circumstances.
Right, and so they've set up a normal hearings process. Everybody's allowed to come along and make their views known. And in what
As long
way?
as they have provided a written submission, so
Yes,
they can come and
sure.
talk to their submission.
Sure. Are they in any way having to qualify to make their views known? Or could they just be a resident of Christchurch interested in Hagley Park?
Absolutely. It's open to all. That's the purpose of it.
Right, so that's the variation
Yep.
of the lease?
And the Act is quite clear that council must give cognizance to the feedback before making their decision.
Right, so if you run through that timeline for the Minister, the district plan change and the hearings panel hearings and coming back to council, what's the timeline then?
Well, I don't think you should see it as linear, because it can be run in parallel. The Minister's process can go along this pathway, and if required, council's process can run along a parallel pathway. So for the Reserves Act process, the typical timeframe is 3 months. There's a statutory requirement for 1 month's notification. There is time to receive, prepare and provide for the hearing. The hearings are held and then council has to make a decision.
Does that meet the deadline?
Just.
Really?
It does. Yes, we've had advice from New Zealand Cricket that they're prepared to receive a final outcome of this process by the end of December.
Mike?
Thank you. I'm actually happy to move a recommendation to actually request. I might like your amendment.
Can I just check the questions that I put into the CE?
Yeah.
So I've just got an additional recommendation here that authorise staff to initiate any required processes, including consultation under the Reserves Act in respect of the lease or otherwise, should the Minister determine to proceed with the Section 71 proposal. So that authorises staff to get on with that process should the Minister decide to go into that public notification process. So you're happy to move the resolution?
Well, not with because the first one is actually about the attachments, which is against using the regeneration.
Not if we change the attachment.
Yeah, that was what my resolution was going to be about, was actually requesting staff to provide a supportive.
Weren't we going to do this next week? Like, why are we doing it now?
Well, I think we've gone through this whole.
Can we then go to debate with it? Like,
yeah. Well, I think Jamie's got a.
yeah, and if you're happy, Madam Mayor, to go to debate,
I'm
then
not
can I
happy
just?
anymore.
Well, I don't think any. No, I retract that, Madam Mayor. I think I'm getting the sense that quite a lot of people around this table are quite keen to move on it one way or another, and I sense that we run a risk of overcomplicating.
The thing is that we've had advice that our role is not to make a decision on the issue.
No, not.
Our advice is to provide feedback.
Exactly.
There are elements within the feedback that I think are extremely important and will stand regardless of people's position on the issue. But there are elements within it, I think, that could be nuanced, is that an okay word? That might provide a more flexibility in terms of Regenerate Christchurch's ability to take that on board and adjust the proposal that goes to their board and then the proposal from there that goes to the Minister. Yeah, so I mean, I think an attachment that basically says we support the proposal actually won't be helpful to Regenerate Christchurch. They've got some very important technical points to make, and you know, the Minister's decision-making process is subject to judicial review. So I just want to make sure that we give good advice and make sure that we follow good process ourselves. So, yeah. So that's where we're up to.
Could I ask then if staff have any concerns with the amendment?
We haven't even seen it.
May I ask for you to present the amendment?
Yeah, well, the thing is,
can we share the amendment with the crowd?
We actually haven't got a.
That was my.
We haven't. Yeah, this is actually not an amendment to the resolution. So the resolution is about providing feedback, providing a motion of support in terms of the proposal itself is a separate matter.
So well then it's given that no one else has spoken around it. Can I just simply move the resolution?
No, we haven't moved the actual resolution yet. So
well, that's what I'm wanting to do is move this resolution.
So you don't
Not
want
the staff
to, you don't want to
recommendation.
send any feedback to Regenerate Christchurch, because this does not. It asks you to amend the draft council feedback to be consistent with
endorse
support,
Regenerate Christchurch's draft proposal.
Support is not what we are legally able to do in this process. So I don't mind you
Support the use
asking
of
for
Section 71.
additional work to be done on the actual feedback that we provide. And I don't mind having a separate resolution on the support of the use of Section 71 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act for Hagley Oval and the endorsement of Regenerate Christchurch's draft proposal. But that is not what we are being asked to do by Regenerate Christchurch in terms of the legal processes that we go through. So I don't mind. I mean, it's an additional point that we can debate afterwards. But what I'm sensing is that council laws are not entirely happy with all of the detail that's in the attachment. And it is very difficult in this setting to actually go through each and every one of the elements and saying, we're good with that, we're not good with that, we're good with that, we're not good with that. So I'm actually looking for some assistance here in terms of how we might resolve this. We have got additional time because of next week.
Yeah,
That's exactly what mine does, though. It says that I'm good with the Regenerate Christchurch draft proposal, and if people agree with me, they can vote with me, and if they don't,
it is not
they don't have
helpful to the process that Regenerate Christchurch get a motion of support carried by a majority around a council
and request
table.
staff to amend the council feedback to be consistent with the above resolution.
They can't amend the feedback to be inconsistent with the legal obligations that we have under the Local Government Act and under the Hagley Park Management Plan
it can't
and
just
the
be
Reserves
me,
Act.
though, Leanne, that finds this frustratingly overly complicated. That I think that we have a fabulous facility in Hagley Oval, and we
Point of order. We're not into debate.
I'm really happy to have that debate, but what I don't want to have derailed is the legal process that we want to go through. So I'm happy that we defer the feedback on the advice and we debate your resolution. So you move it as a resolution and we can debate that, but I'm not going to have it derailing what is a legal obligation that we have as a council to provide proper feedback to Regen Christchurch so they can adjust their plan. It isn't the one. What Regenerate Christchurch's draft proposal is not the proposal, I believe, that they will be presenting to their board, because they have heard a number of things today and they are working with staff around a different set of issues that need to be factored in. But if people just want to have a debate about lights in Hagley Park, then please, I beg of you, can we separate the two issues, and we will get the matter back on the agenda next week with the detailed issue, and we'll have a debate around the support or otherwise of the use of Section 71 and the Regenerate Christchurch's draft proposal, which needs amending. So I'm in the hands of the council.
Leanne, can I just make a comment on that? The whole paper points to around getting a process, and that's what we should really be debating, not the lights or any other features.
I have had nobody move a resolution other than James, who wants to move what he's described as an amendment. And I'm suggesting to the meeting that it is not an amendment to the resolution.
I'm happy to move the earlier resolutions.
1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Well, I'm trying.
Mike's already done one. So.
Yeah, Mike.
Is the key sentence in the feedback in attachment A that some councillors disagree with? Because the feedback in attachment A, there's lots of really good feedback on how things might happen and process in bits and pieces. But the key sentence seems to be on page 549, which is the use of the Section 71 process. And it's the first sentence there which says the council does not consider it appropriate to use the Act to make the proposed amendments. If that particular sentence was not in attachment A, does the rest of the feedback still useful? And is it just that the key one that people are stuck on?
I don't know. I mean, that is certainly something that I would like to see removed.
Yeah, that would be my key one.
I don't think that is not the key issue that we have to provide by way of feedback to Regen Christchurch. Yep, Tim.
Could do that.
Yep.
If there is a feeling around this table that we want to kind of be more positive than negative,
Yep.
what is the issue with regarding removing that sentence?
There's no, that's entirely in your decision. If councillor Templeton's suggestion is that we delete that sentence, the rest of the feedback still makes sense, if you like.
Yep.
Look, a lot of the feedback is technical, technical stuff, and we're having ongoing conversations with Regen about that, and we'll continue to have conversations with them about that. So there is that higher order point about which vehicle is the right vehicle, and we can effectively stay silent on it and delete that. That was staff's opinion, but if council disagrees with that, delete the sentence.
Because it does flavour the entire following, so it doesn't. If removing that doesn't change any of the detail and the technical information.
No.
Just, okay. So, is it possible to remove that, as Councillor Templeton suggested, that first small sentence?
There's more stuff though too, which in there than just that, which isn't helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious. But
can I make a suggestion that might help deal with that? So what you've got is a very detailed draft submission and a staff recommendation that the council approve that detailed stuff. Submission back to Regenerate Christchurch. Now, there's no way you can do the fine drafting of that around the council table. What you can do is decide what key principles you want to apply to what the feedback is. So you could decide, for example, as David just said, you wanted to stay neutral about use of Section 71, or you want to express an opinion on use of Section 71. So that's one principle you can decide on. Another principle you can decide on is that you want it to say, for example, that there should be parallel processes for use of Section 71 and any Reserves Act processes that are needed, and that you want that to be reflected in the feedback to Regenerate Christchurch. You could also say that you want staff to be as helpful as possible to Regenerate Christchurch in making technical recommendations on the way the provisions proposed for the district plan work, because that's a lot of the detail that's in there now. And if your resolution was to just support what Regenerate Christchurch proposed, then you're not giving any constructive feedback to Regenerate
well, can we say
Christchurch.
supports the use of Section 71 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act for Hagley Oval?
So you could come up with 3 or 4 key principles that you want to apply, and then delegate authority to someone, whether it's staff or whether it's a working party of staff and councillors, to resolve it.
So would it be helpful, Brent and staff, if council said, as you're saying, to put it very simply, yay, nay or neutral, once we've established which one, then the next step would be how helpful or how negative or just neutral. Is that
so that's one part of it, and as I say, another part of it, making a comment about, directing staff to make a comment about the Reserves Act process going parallel and retaining in that helpful technical stuff.
So to help the staff, the ideal around this table would be to give you a steer on yay, nay, or neutral. Would that
For
be
Section
correct?
71.
Yes, on the section. That's all we're discussing with Section 71.
So let's do that. Supports the use of Section 71 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. Well, for argument's sake, I'm saying yes, and if people disagree, then they can say no.
No, you would have to
amend the draft council feedback.
By these key principles, and delegate to maybe Leanne and Andrew or someone like that to sign off on the final feedback.
Whatever works.
Which is this one here, approves providing the amended feedback to change.
Very helpful feedback from the staff that's in the document here.
So
I like the resolutions that are before us, 1, 2 and 3. And I'm very happy that we have a go at that now, or we delay it till the next meeting on next week. I think they're already moved and seconded. But I'm not sure what the amended feedback is.
Well, that's the issue.
Wordsmith the document. Well, then we don't see what it is.
I don't know what the time constraints are. Do we want to bring it back next week?
Well, wasn't that the agreement that we had? We'd hear the submissions today and bring it back next week.
No.
Yanni, we didn't know we had a meeting next week at the time that this was discussed.
So that's what,
And we did actually think that there was going to be time to address it today. So thank you for your helpful intervention.
can I just ask the questions that we've submitted? Can we, I still haven't had answers from 2 days ago.
Oh,
So just want to check.
so
What could be subject to some reflection?
there are two ways to proceed. One is just to move that this matter lie on the table until next week, or that we get a sense that we're approving a process whereby we provide feedback to Regenerate Christchurch, and that the substantive proposal will come back to council next week for sign-off. Or you can delegate it to
We need to
me
be
and
careful with the word
Deputy
approval
Mayor.
of process.
I'm just wondering, in terms of bringing it back next week, exactly what you're trying to achieve with that. A lot of the feedback is technical
I know.
matters, so I'm not sure if it's helpful
I think,
for...
look, I think the amended feedback is really focused on the use of Section 71, which seems to be presented in a very one-sided light, and it is a view, but it is not universally shared around the table. So I think that if we could have this approval to provide amended feedback to Regenerate Christchurch on the proposal to change the whatever, get the grammar right, subject to the sign-off by the Mayor and Deputy Mayor, then we'll hear the debate, we'll know what we're looking for, and we'll be able to move on. But James, in terms of your resolution, which by way of amendment would be dealt with as a separate...
I think what you've just suggested is a good way forward. I guess I was getting frustrated thinking there's got to be a simpler way for this. I'm hearing that there is a will to exercise or to see the Section 71 powers used by and large, and I was trying to expedite an ability to support that occurring, but I think what you've just outlined is pragmatic.
Thank you. I do look for pragmatic solutions from time to time. Okay, the joys. All right, so Mike, you moved this, and yes, you did a long time ago. And Tim.
Well, I'd say I'd second it if that's...
Yeah. We can go back to questions now, but we've now got the resolutions moved and seconded, so they're in front of us.
I just wondered really whether we needed the wording proposal to amend the district plan via the Section 71 process. We're not talking about Section 71 anywhere in our feedback or amending the plan.
Yeah, but we've been asked to provide feedback to Regenerate Christchurch on the proposal to amend the district plan. We've been asked to do that. I mean, we can put under Section 71 of the Act if you want, but I don't see the point. We know that's what the paper's all about.
Yeah, well, it just gave a bit more clarity to the...
Statutory partners are being invited to do this under Section 71 of the Act. So if you put under Section 71 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act.
No, the feedback itself is...
Oh, the statutory feedback is under Section... under Section 66 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. Thank you. All right, so we've got a mover and a seconder, and so I will open that up to debate.
So, sorry, can we just be clear? The sign-off by you and the Deputy Mayor has the ability to change the feedback that we're being asked to approve?
We've got approves providing the amended feedback. So the feedback will be amended to take into account that the difference of views in terms of the weighting of what is currently one-sided to give it some more balance.
So, yeah, my preference would be that this is a significant issue for the city. We should see the feedback before we agree to it, especially just signing off amended feedback that we don't know what it says.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing we could do is not to take a clear position on the use of Section 71 or not, but to give feedback which is highly relevant and useful to the Regenerate Christchurch board without taking a clear-cut position on it, because there's feedback that we would give that would be very relevant information to go in front of that board as they make their consideration, that doesn't require us to make a decision or take a position on whether Section 71 should be used or not. And in some ways, it would be quite right for us to reserve our position on that until we know exactly what the final proposal would be. So kind of lowering the... Not sort of running a black and white process, but giving feedback which will be useful to the Regenerate Christchurch board in their consideration, which after all is our role.
I was looking
our role, Andrew, I think, is to
Brent for some
Brent,
advice.
But is our role to say to Regenerate Christchurch what we think might be useful if they go ahead, or is our role to say
our views?
It's a good use, it's not a good use? Because if we waited, if we didn't say anything about whether we thought it was a good use or not of the Act, or an appropriate use, of the Act, and then it went ahead, we've kind of missed an opportunity if we ended up not liking the proposal, if you like, or those kind of things.
It is a missed opportunity, but there will be another opportunities if the Minister decides to proceed with the Section 71 process.
Yeah. But this is our one chance to influence whether we think the Minister should decide to use it.
This is the one chance for the Council to influence two things.
That's right.
The first one is the decision by the Board of Regenerate Christchurch. And second thing is the Minister, because if Regenerate Christchurch decide to proceed and deliver something to the Minister, then that's accompanied by a description of the feedback that the strategic partners have given. So this is the opportunity to influence that process. Now, the Council can take the opportunity to be as helpful as it wants to be.
Yeah.
And, for example, stay silent. And already from Ivan that's the option that's been taken, I think, by two of the other councils, because Hagley Park's not in their area.
That's right.
But so staying silent isn't a realistic option.
Yeah.
But the council can very reasonably be as helpful as it wants to be to Regenerate Christchurch.
So
expressing its views.
One of the reasons that council might not want to be particularly determinative on whether it likes it or not is because we haven't had, apart from some deputations today, broader public feedback. But the time that the broader public feedback would come would be during the process, but it wouldn't come to council.
It's not
So it's difficult.
Yeah,
that's it. So it would be difficult for us to take a position on whether we like it or not, except when in the next stage in the process, further down the track, if it does go ahead,
just introducing the new chief executive.
So further down the track, there would be an opportunity for the council to give formal feedback on the proposal itself. So that's kind of the next time we would have our say, at which point we could then take into account community feedback if we liked on our feedback on the proposal. Is that right? We get 2 bites of the cherry.
It's partly right in that the council does get 2 bites of the cherry. So this is the first one. And the second one is if Regenerate Christchurch deliver it to the Minister, and if the Minister decides to publicly notify it rather than reject it, then it's going to be notified. And then the council at that stage, like anyone in the community, can put in a submission.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say that's partly right is that when the council's putting in its submission, it won't have seen the submissions that have been put in by the other parties.
But we would likely get deputations again, and we can be encouraging people to do their own feedback.
Yes.
Yeah.
If there is a change required to the lease, there is then a process for public feedback then.
Assuming that it's publicly notified, and I think we've heard from Andrew that it's inevitable that it's going to be publicly notified.
So that's when that will definitely come up in front of council. So irrelevant which process is taken, that would, and it triggered a change to the lease, then that must go to public consultation.
If it's
So
required.
No.
Because
if
there
it's
may
required.
not be a change to the lease.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant of the Section 71 or the resource consent process, because
There will
either
be a
one
change to the lease.
triggers.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is a Section 71, which is a quicker process than the RMA, and that's the source.
So,
That's the whole
the
point here.
process is not, I mean, either which way, if there's an amendment required, and it's likely that there would be, but if an amendment is required to the lease, then that will happen regardless of whether it's Section 77 or whether it's Section 71 or whether it's an RMA process through the Environment Court.
The Reserves Act specifically allows for joining that process together if it's a notified consent. So rather than go through the Resource Management Act process and have a fully notified consent and everybody has their say and a decision's made and then do it again under the Reserves Act, the Reserves Act in Section 54, I believe, specifically allows for the feedback provided through the RMA to be considered for granting of the lease.
So that is actually a worse situation for public consultation than the one proposed. Because, I mean, you'd have to have the resources to go to the Environment Court.
Well, yes, potentially.
Can I just clarify? So we've got a very strong report here from the staff. What are the bits in it that you and Andrew don't like, that you want to change, so that we can just be aware of them before we're... Because I'd quite like to know what I'm approving. I mean, the staff seem to have gone through every part of the Act and dealt with it incredibly well.
It states the Council does not consider it appropriate to use the GCR Act to make the proposed amendments to the district plan for the reasons outlined below. We actually haven't debated that as a council.
Is that the only sentence you want to change?
No, well, it may be that the tone of the balance needs to change. I mean, it's really to take it out of the submission so that it isn't a submission that opposes. It highlights the issues that they have to take into account.
So you want to change the tone in that paragraph, in that section?
In that section, yes.
Right, okay. So why don't you do that in time for the 29th meeting, and then we'll approve all the wording at that stage?
We could just take it now. We could just say subject to...
Slightly.
Subject to...
Yeah, and bring it back on the 29th.
Yeah, the 29th.
And then bring it back on the 29th. Everybody's got the decision in front of you, in case you're judicially reviewed at any stage.
Some of us would quite like to take a position, I think.
No, but you don't want a judicial review. I mean, you can take you're going to debate at the end, Jamie. It's just that you know what you're debating, as opposed to...
No, I think Jamie's point is that if it just comes back amended and balanced for approval, then Jamie would be wanting it to be changed again to be more supportive.
Totally fine, and he will no doubt say that forcefully.
But it might be that there's a majority around the table who would like it to be more supportive.
Totally fine.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so,
now.
So what we could do, and it just simply approves providing amended feedback. Actually, take out the references to Section 66, providing feedback to Regenerate Christchurch, the detail of which will be signed off by Council at the meeting of Thursday, the 29th of August 2019. We're hearing what people are saying, and we're all trying to find solutions. So if you could just leave it with us, and I'll bring Andrew into the mix and we'll meet with staff, but let us see if we can get to crystallise what the issues are around the Section 71, and to provide a couple of options for us to consider on the day, and that enables those that would like to take a more affirmative position on the because councillors need to take advice on what the legal issues are, because I think they are arguable, they are debatable, But let's then focus on the real issue in front of us, which is the use of Section 71 versus the RMA and the consequences of that.
So the proposal is next week, to move this to next week with regards to having options of a neutral or more positive options, which we can then debate and vote on next week.
That's right.
Yep.
But if we could essentially do this, then we're delegating the ability to provide with additional technical comments. So we're resolving that, and we're authorising staff to initiate required processes should that happen. So at least we get those out of the way, and what we bring back for sign-off on council is essentially the feedback, with the particular focus on the use of Section 71.
Which is because some of us are quite positive and some of us want to stay neutral.
I really get that, and I'm very happy to devote some energy into the drafting that will be required. I mean, devote some energy into providing instructions to staff as to the drafting, because I'll leave that to the technical experts. All right. So that resolution has been moved and seconded. If councillors Davidson and Scandrett are happy with the way that it's been worded, and all right. So I'll put that.
So can we get some clarity under 3 around just like the lease changes? I mean, I did submit this question I think 2 days ago. I just want to be really clear about.
We haven't got the detailed design. You heard staff answer that they can't even initiate this process until they have a detailed design in front of them.
Well, maybe, except things like the use of the pavilion for non-sports related things is in the lease. So the lease says it's a sports pavilion, and you know, like there's a number of changes that are suggested around the usage. So it just would be good to know that. So if there's overlap between the changes that are going into the district plan and what that means for the lease arrangements, I think we just need to be really clear about that. But given that it's coming back next week, I was just wondering, given that the question hasn't been answered for today's meeting, whether I can get an answer for next week.
All right. So we'll just we'll just have.
Noting that staff will provide further advice to council about the process.
Yeah, so change authorised to note.
Couldn't it just stay as authorised, but just note staff will provide?
Just a noting provision that will provide additional
advice.
Provide
additional advice.
All right, I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Dion Swiggs opposed. Right, okay. And